This is it, the ultimate dimension for rest and stories, and it's called Sleepy Myths.
There are nights when the air itself hums softly, like a machine still running somewhere far away. And that's how it began. Rick had been working in the garage again, the kind of tinkering that didn't end in explosions but in quiet sighs. Morty was half asleep upstairs, his head heavy with the faint scent of engine oil and burnt toast, the usual perfume of their home. The only sound was the flicker of some forgotten light beneath the house, the sound of a portal that had been left just slightly open. He didn't notice at first. No one ever does when universes begin to breathe into each other. But sometime past midnight, as the crickets outside fell silent and the wind began to move differently, something pale and luminous seeped under Morty's bedroom door, a slow wave of green light, soft as moonlit water. It wasn't bright enough to wake him fully, just enough to color his dreams. That night, Morty dreamed of infinite Ricks, not the loud, drunk, laughing ones, not the scientists or the wanderers or the broken men with blue hair and too much memory. These Ricks were quiet. Some stood by oceans of glass. Some sat alone in gardens that bloomed under the gravity of their sadness. And all of them, every single one, was smiling faintly. A tired, knowing smile that said, "We've seen it all, kid." In the dream, they turned toward him as one, and though none spoke, Morty heard it anyway. The same words echoing through every version of reality. It's okay to rest now. When he woke, his room was filled with that faint portal glow, a mist of green light trembling against his ceiling. Rick was asleep in his chair downstairs, a wrench still in his hand, goggles askew, head tilted just enough to look human again. For once he didn't snore. Morty stood at the top of the stairs watching him. There was something fragile about the way Rick slept. Like the universe itself was holding its breath, afraid to disturb him. He thought about closing the portal. But the light looked peaceful, like it wasn't trying to escape or consume, just exist. So he let it stay. Hours passed. The night deepened. The glow softened until it looked like the reflection of a candle burning in 1,000 unseen mirrors. Morty lay back down, his thoughts drifting. He imagined what it would feel like if all the Ricks across the multiverse were sleeping too. Every genius, every version, every echo. And for one small, impossible moment, the cosmos went still. He dreamed again. This time, he saw Rick walking through a fog of stars. Each one shimmered faintly when he passed, whispering tiny pieces of conversation, jokes, fragments, sighs. Rick didn't respond. He just kept walking, coat dragging through the starlight like a comet's tail. Morty tried to call out, but his voice made no sound. Rick turned, though somehow hearing him through the dream. He raised one hand, as if waving, but it looked more like goodbye. When Morty woke the second time, the portal was still glowing, and Rick was gone from the chair. The house was quiet, quiet. There was no hum of tools, no belch, no sarcastic mutter from the kitchen. Only that pale green light, pulsing faintly against the floorboards, breathing like something alive. Morty crept downstairs, whispering, "Rick!" Silence answered him, but the light shifted, and in that glow he saw shapes, outlines of worlds, faces that flickered like old memories. He saw himself older. He saw Rick younger. He saw versions of their home where laughter still lingered. And then he saw something he didn't understand. Rick standing in front of an empty door, his hand hovering above a knob he never turned. "Don't," Morty whispered, though he didn't know why. The image faded. When Rick finally returned, hours later, he didn't mention where he'd gone. He just looked at the portal, still humming faintly, and muttered, "Huh, forgot to close that one." Morty waited for the usual rant, some scientific excuse, some throwaway joke. But Rick just stared at the glow for a long, still moment. His face softened, and he said quietly, almost to himself, "Sometimes things are better left a little open." Then he turned, walked past Morty, and poured himself a drink he didn't sip. That night, before bed, Morty stood at his window again. The glow was gone now, but the silence that replaced it felt gentle, like the world had exhaled after holding its breath too long. He thought about the dream, the infinite Ricks all smiling, all resting, and for the first time he wondered if maybe that was the point. Not the adventures, not the chaos, just learning how to stop running. The stars above the Smith house flickered quietly, patient as old memories. Morty whispered to them, "Good night." Somewhere, far across the infinite multiverse, 1,000 Ricks might have done the same. The night grew heavier, the air slower, like even time wanted to sleep, and the portal, though gone, left behind a faint hum deep in the floorboards. A lullaby of science and sorrow. A promise that not everything bright has to burn forever. There are sounds in the multiverse that don't belong to any one world. Some drift between realities like pollen in a cosmic wind, soft, weightless, impossible to trace. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, you can hear them. Morty heard it first one morning after the portal night. It began as a whisper, almost like air moving through glass. Then it became something else, something lighter, familiar, and strangely gentle. It was laughter. But not the sharp kind that breaks a silence, not the chaotic, belly-deep kind Rick used to bark when a plan went wrong, but somehow worked anyway. No, this laughter was distant, slow. It shimmered through the air like rain on warm metal. And it felt kind. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. "Rick?" he called softly. From the garage below came the usual hum of machinery, the low murmur of science still half asleep. But the laughter didn't come from there. It came from everywhere. He could hear it in the space between seconds, in the echo of his own breath, in the dust motes turning in the morning light. Each faint chuckle sounded like someone remembering something they thought they had lost, and finding it again. When Morty finally stepped into the garage, Rick was standing perfectly still, eyes closed as though listening too. A portal spun faintly on the far wall, its edges trembling in a rhythm almost musical. The laughter drifted through it, thousands of versions of it, overlapping like wind chimes in a soft breeze. Morty whispered, "What is that?" Rick didn't open his eyes. "That," he said, voice low and weary, "is the multiverse exhaling." Morty frowned. "What does that even mean?" Rick sighed, opening one eye now, studying the shimmer of the portal. "Every laugh that ever happened, kid, it doesn't just vanish." "You think sound dies?" "Nah, it stretches, thins out, travels, maybe forever. Every joke ever told, every stupid moment worth remembering, it's all still out there. Just echoing." Morty tilted his head, listening again. "It doesn't sound sad," he said. Rick smirked faintly. "It isn't, that's the thing. You can go insane out there, Morty, lose count of who you are, lose track of what's real. But somewhere in all that noise, there's still this sound. Someone who's seen too much and still decides to laugh." He took a sip from his flask and added quietly, "Guess that's hope in scientific form." The day passed in slow colors. They didn't go anywhere. Rick just let the portal hum softly, letting the laughter filter through the house like sunlight through blinds. Morty lay on the floor, listening, imagining each chuckle belonged to a different version of them. A Rick who learned how to stay? A Morty who never had to run? A world where the joke didn't need to hurt to be funny? He started to notice patterns. Some laughs had tones, small emotional signatures. One sounded like a sigh before it cracked into joy. Another trembled like tears beneath the humor. They weren't just random echoes, they were memories. The universe remembering itself. When he told Rick that, the old man just muttered, "Careful, Morty, you start romanticizing noise. Next thing you know, you're writing poetry about black holes." But later, Morty caught him sitting alone by the open portal, listening too. His eyes soft. Distant that night, the laughter deepened. It came in waves now, full, melodic waves that carried the rhythm of breathing. Morty fell asleep to it. And when he dreamed of all the people who'd ever laughed with him. He saw his sister, in another version of Earth, laughing at something dumb he said. He saw his mom, laughing while the world behind her glitched between realities. He even saw Rick, not this Rick, but others, hundreds of them all laughing together, not because of irony or madness, but because they remembered what it was like to be alive in that dream. The sound of laughter turned into light, warm, golden light that rippled through the void. Every laugh became a star, and for a moment, the universe was filled with billions of small suns, each one powered by someone who once refused to give up. Morty stood beneath that glowing storm and whispered, "Please don't stop." When he awoke, the sound was still there, faint but steady. Rick was gone from the garage again. Only the portal shimmered, softer now, like it had been crying and was trying to hide it. Morty followed the faint noise outside, barefoot, across dew-wet grass. The sunrise was pale, the air cool. And there, under the sky, still half asleep, Rick stood by the fence, staring at nothing. He didn't turn when Morty approached. "Morning, Rick," Morty said quietly. Rick grunted. "Morning." They stood in silence a long while, just listening to that strange cosmic laughter, still humming somewhere above the clouds. Finally, Rick said, "You hear it too?" "Yeah," Rick nodded. "And don't forget it. Ever. When it gets too heavy, when the math stops making sense. Just remember that sound?" He paused, his voice barely a whisper now. "It's every version of you that made it through." "Every joke you didn't understand until it saved your life," Morty blinked. "You mean like we're all part of the same—" Rick cut him off gently. "No theories, kid. Just listen." So Morty did, and together they stood there, breathing in sync with the universe. Two small humans listening to the laughter of infinity. Later that evening, as the stars returned, Morty thought of something he'd never said aloud. "Rick," he murmured, "do you think all those Ricks— all those people laughing out there, do they know we're listening?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He just watched the stars flicker in his reflection, then said, "I think they're laughing for us, Morty, not at us. That's the difference." The words lingered between them like fog. And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, Morty laughed too, a small, honest laugh. It echoed once, then twice, and somewhere beyond time, the universe quietly added it to the song. It began with the smell of rain, not the kind that falls from the sky, but the kind that lives somewhere deep inside a dream, that faint, silver scent of things returning home. Morty woke to it one morning, his pillow cool, his room washed in quiet light that didn't seem to come from anywhere at all. The laughter from the night before had faded, leaving behind a soft hum like the afterglow of sound. He blinked slowly. Something was different. The blanket on his bed was blue, not the dull, faded one he always used, but a soft, heavy blue that felt hand-stitched. And on the desk beside him sat a cup of cocoa, still warm, though he hadn't made it. When he stepped out of bed, the floor creaked. But it wasn't his floor. It was smoother, older, as if sanded down by years of footsteps that weren't his own. He looked around. Everything was familiar and wrong at the same time. The posters on his wall were of shows he half remembered, and the photo of his family, Mom, Summer, and Rick, had something off about it. His own face smiled back at him, but the background wasn't Earth. It was a golden field beneath twin moons. He felt his heartbeat slow, not from fear, but from recognition. He'd never been there, and yet he had. Rick was already in the kitchen when Morty arrived, staring into a mug of coffee like it might give him answers. "Morning, kid," he muttered, not looking up. Morty hesitated before sitting down. "Rick, did you do something to the house?" Rick raised an eyebrow. "Define something," Morty gestured vaguely. "Everything feels off, like we're not where we were yesterday," Rick sighed. "Yeah, about that." He set his mug down and leaned back. "You remember last night's laughter storm?" Morty nodded slowly. "Well," Rick continued, "when the multiverse laughs that hard, sometimes it forgets which version of things go where. Borders blur. Memories overlap. You might have picked up a few souvenirs?" "Souvenirs?" Rick shrugged. "Borrowed memories. Stray realities. Happens more often than you'd think. You'll wake up remembering stuff you never did. It's harmless. Mostly," Morty frowned. "So this isn't our world?" Rick took another sip. "It's a world. Close enough." There was a pause. The coffee machine clicked quietly in the background, and outside, a wind moved through leaves that might not even be real. Later, Morty walked out onto the porch. The air smelled of lilacs and static. Across the yard stood a tree, tall, pale, its bark glowing faintly like moonlight. It wasn't there yesterday. When he touched it, images bloomed behind his eyes. A little girl's laughter, a world with blue grass, Rick, younger, smiling at someone he didn't recognize. And then silence. He pulled his hand away and stared. His own breathing felt borrowed. He whispered, "Whose memories are these?" From behind him, Rick's voice floated softly, quieter than usual. "Maybe yours, maybe mine. Maybe the universe's way of saying, we remember too much." Morty turned. "What do you mean?" Rick walked over, hands in his pockets, gaze distant. "There's this theory, well, not a theory, more like a feeling. The multiverse stores memories the way oceans store light. Every choice, every version of us when it ripples. Sometimes the tide comes back carrying pieces of what we forgot." Morty looked at the glowing bark again. "So, I'm just remembering things from other me's." Rick smiled faintly. "You could think of it that way. Or maybe you're remembering something the universe wanted you to know." He turned to leave, then added softly, "Don't get hung up on what's real, Morty. Reality's just a dream that lasted a little too long." That night, the dreams deepened. Morty saw entire lifetimes unfolding in a single breath. He stood on alien beaches, building sandcastles with people who called him by name. He sat beside Ricks who played guitar beneath twin suns. He laughed with summers who never grew tired of adventure and hugged mothers who never had to say goodbye. Each memory felt like it had weight. Not a burden, but a warmth. They weren't his lives, but they could have been, and through it all, one sound remained. The echo of that laughter, softer now, like someone humming a lullaby across time. In the dream, Morty walked through an endless corridor of doors. Each door had a version of him inside, older, younger, braver, quieter. Some open to stars, some open to silence, and one open to Rick, sitting in a small room surrounded by photos that flickered like fading constellations. Rick looked up, smiling faintly. "You're not supposed to be here," he said gently. "I don't know where here is," Morty replied. Rick tapped his chest. That's the point. When Morty woke again, dawn was just beginning. The world around him had settled. No more shifting walls or glowing trees. Everything looked ordinary again, except for one thing. On his desk, where the cocoa had been, sat a photograph. It was the same one from before at the family picture, but now, behind them, the golden field was gone. It was just grass, green and earthly. Still, Morty could swear he smelled lilacs. He carried the photo into the garage where Rick was already working, surrounded by the usual chaos of tools and sparks. "Rick," he said quietly, holding up the photo, "do you ever miss it?" "The other versions?" The lives that weren't yours. Rick froze for a moment. Then he turned, eyes soft beneath the tiredness. Every damn day, Morty. But that's the thing about memories that don't belong to you. Sometimes they're reminders. Sometimes they're gifts. The universe letting you peek into what peace might have looked like. Morty stared at the photo again.
Do you think it's real?
Rick smiled sadly. Real enough to remember.
Real enough to dream about? He patted Morty's shoulder.
Now get some rest, kid. You've got universes in your head. That night, Morty sat by the window watching stars ripple faintly in the sky. They looked softer than before, almost familiar. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, maybe the memories don't have to belong to me to mean something. And as sleep drifted in, quiet, patient, cosmic, he thought he heard laughter again, not from another world, but from within his own heart. It wasn't a planet they landed on that morning. It was more like a pause, a space between two realities, quiet and still, like the breath between thoughts. The sky there was green, but softly so, as if it had learned gentleness over centuries. The ground shimmered faintly with dew that glowed in slow rhythm, pulsing to some invisible heartbeat. The air carried the scent of things growing, not just plants, but memories, blooming one after another in silence. Morty followed Rick down a narrow path lined with vines. The vines weren't ordinary either. They seemed alive in a remembering sort of way, curling toward sound, whispering faintly as they brushed their leaves together. "Where are we?" Morty asked, watching as one of the vines reached for his sleeve like a curious hand. Rick didn't look back. A forgotten experiment.
I made this place a long time ago.
Wanted to see if time could grow, Morty blinked. Grow? Rick stopped near a stone bench half covered in moss. He touched the ground with a finger, tracing the faint outline of a spiral.
Yeah, instead of ticking, I wanted it to breathe.
Plants that absorb memories and turn them into moments you can walk through. Thought it might help me. Slow down, Morty sat beside him.
And did it?
Rick's smile barely reached his eyes. For a while, they sat quietly for a bit. Around them, the garden hummed, low and steady, like a lullaby without words. Somewhere in the distance, a light flickered, soft and golden, as if the sun had been replaced by an old lamp. After a while, Morty noticed small flowers blooming along the vines. Each one opened slowly, revealing faint scenes inside their petals. A birthday, a rainy street, a laugh shared across universes.
Tiny windows into lives that might have been. Rick, Morty whispered, these flowers.
Their memories? Rick nodded. Every seed I planted held one. Regrets mostly. Things I didn't do or did too late. Morty leaned closer, watching a flower unfold completely. Inside it, he saw a younger version of Rick, holding a small child, not quite Beth, but close, beneath a blue sky. The image shimmered and dissolved. You called them regrets, Morty said softly. But they don't look sad. Rick's voice came quieter. That's the thing about regret. If you let it sit long enough, it becomes something softer.
Something almost beautiful. Morty looked around.
The vines moved gently with the wind, the flowers opening and closing as though the garden itself was breathing. Can I plant one? Rick raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. Sure, the soil likes honesty. Morty searched his pocket and found a small marble, one he'd carried since childhood, the last piece from a broken set. He placed it in the dirt, hesitating. What should I say? Rick leaned back, watching the horizon fade into mist. Say something you wish you'd said sooner. Morty closed his eyes.
I wish I told Mom that I still remember her lullabies. The soil shimmered faintly.
The marble sank, and within moments, a thin green sprout rose where it had been. Its first leaf opened like an eyelid waking from sleep. Rick smiled faintly. See?
It heard you. They stayed like that for a long time, surrounded by the slow rhythm of growing things.
The garden didn't rush. It didn't demand anything. It just existed. Patient, forgiving, infinite. Eventually, Morty noticed another patch near the edge where the vines had wilted. Their color was fading and the soil beneath them looked dry. "Something wrong with that part?" he asked. Rick followed his gaze. "That's where I buried memories I didn't want to keep." Morty hesitated.
Can memories die?
Rick exhaled.
No, but they can stop hurting. He stood, brushing off his coat. Come on.
"There's something else I want to show you." They walked deeper into the garden where the light grew softer, almost dim. A gentle fog gathered around their feet. Ahead stood a single tree, tall, thin, and glowing faintly from within. Rick stopped beneath it. "This one's special," he said. "Every time someone forgives themselves, a leaf grows." Morty stared up. The branches shimmered with countless leaves, some dim, some bright. "There's so many," Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, people are better at forgiveness than they think." Morty smiled faintly. "Even you?" Rick chuckled, low and quiet. "Working on it." A breeze moved through, carrying the sound of rustling leaves that almost felt like sighs. The light in the tree pulsed gently, casting soft shadows across Rick's face. Morty watched him for a while. "You ever think about staying here?" Rick tilted his head.
Sometimes.
"But the garden doesn't need me anymore. It grows without me now." "That's how I know it worked." They stood in silence as the air dimmed into twilight. The garden glowed softly, the vines whispering to one another in a language too old to understand. Somewhere, water trickled, slow, patient, eternal. Morty sat back down, his hands resting on the earth. "It feels
peaceful here." Rick looked toward the horizon where the light was fading.
"That's what time feels like when it stops trying to escape." Neither of them spoke again for a while. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken, something like rest. Morty thought about the seed he planted, about the wish he'd whispered. Maybe, somewhere beneath the soil, that wish was already growing, roots spreading, turning into something soft enough to hold. And, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to ask what came next. They left the garden behind in silence. The ship drifted through a corridor of quiet stars, their faint light blinking like slow heartbeats. Rick didn't say much and Morty didn't ask. There was a gentleness between them, a shared awareness that some places weren't meant to be rushed away from. Outside the window, galaxies passed like memories, soft colors bleeding into one another, spirals made of ancient dust. Morty leaned against the glass, tracing invisible lines with his finger. "So where to next?" Rick pressed a few buttons, the console humming softly beneath his hands.
A world where nobody laughs anymore. Morty frowned. You mean like they can't?
Rick's voice was quiet. More like they forgot how. The ship landed in a valley blanketed by silver mist. No wind, no sound. Even their footsteps felt muffled, like the world was wrapped in cotton. The sky above was pale and still, its stars hidden behind a thin veil of frozen air. Buildings stood nearby, small, square, and grey, their walls cracked but clean, as if time had simply stopped caring. People walked slowly through the streets, their faces blank yet peaceful, their eyes carrying a soft sort of emptiness. Morty looked around.
It feels strange.
Like everything's waiting for something that never happens. Rick nodded. Laughter used to fill this place. Centuries ago, it was the comedy capital of the multiverse. But they found out that joy fades, so they chose to stop trying. Morty glanced at a child sitting by a fountain, her eyes fixed on the rippling water.
That's kind of sad, Rick exhaled, his breath forming a faint mist. Yeah, but it's quiet.
Sometimes people trade laughter for silence when the noise hurts too much. They wandered deeper into the town until they reached an old theatre. Its doors hung open, dust gathering in soft drifts across the floor. Rows of empty seats faced a stage illuminated by one faint light, a single bulb that hadn't burned out. Morty walked down the aisle, his voice barely a whisper. What happened here? Rick looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the stage. The last performer told a joke that was so honest it broke them.
They stopped pretending to laugh after that, Morty shivered. What was the joke?
Rick's eyes softened. No one remembers.
That's what makes it work. He walked up to the stage and stood in the light.
Dust floated through the beam like drifting stars. Rick's shadow stretched long across the seats. For a moment he just stood there, then said quietly, "You ever wonder why people laugh, Morty?" Morty shrugged.
"'Cause things are funny."
Rick shook his head. "No, they laugh because it's the only way to breathe when the truth's too heavy. Every laugh is an exhale." Morty thought about it. About the garden they'd left behind, about the quiet seeds and glowing leaves. So what happens when nobody laughs anymore? Rick looked toward the ceiling, where cracks formed faint constellations. Then the air gets heavy. As if on cue, the air in the theatre felt thicker. The silence deepened. Morty could hear his heartbeat, slow and steady. Somewhere in the distance, a soft chime echoed, delicate, like wind through glass. They followed the sound outside. Down a narrow alley they found an old mechanical device half buried beneath sand. It looked like a broken music box, gears glinting faintly under the pale light. Rick knelt beside it, brushing off the dust.
"This thing used to record laughter. Every giggle, every chuckle, every snort."
They used to bottle joy here, thinking it could be preserved. Morty crouched beside him. "Can you fix it?" Rick ran his fingers over the metal, then stopped. "Yeah, but I'm not sure I should." Morty tilted his head. "Why not?" Rick's voice softened. "'Cause sometimes the silence is part of the healing. You can't force joy back into a place that's still remembering why it left." They sat there for a long while. The machine's tiny gears ticked faintly, like a tired heartbeat. Morty picked up a piece of metal shaped like a small bell and shook it gently. It made no sound. He looked up at Rick. "Maybe they just need a reason to laugh again." Rick smiled faintly, that quiet, tired kind of smile that never reached his eyes but still meant something. "Maybe, but not every world gets its laughter back.
Some worlds just
Learn to hum instead." They watched as a few townsfolk gathered near the fountain. One of them began to hum, low, uncertain, like testing a long-forgotten melody. Another joined in, then another. The sound spread, soft and wordless, filling the air like the first hint of dawn. Morty felt something shift inside him. The melody wasn't laughter, but it was alive. It trembled with warmth, with something close to memory. Rick closed his eyes. Guess they found another way to breathe. The mist around the valley began to thin, revealing faint light breaking through the clouds. The color returned, pale gold, like morning. The fountain's water shimmered. The town exhaled. Morty looked at Rick. "You think they'll ever laugh again?" Rick adjusted his coat, watching the sky grow brighter. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter if they do. What matters is that they remember how it felt." Morty nodded slowly.
"You mean—"
"They don't need the sound, just the feeling," Rick smiled. "Exactly, kid. Sometimes peace is just laughter slowed down." As they walked back to the ship, the humming followed them. A soft, steady echo of life returning. Morty glanced back once more at the valley. It didn't look lonely anymore, just resting. When they lifted off, the clouds parted completely. For a moment, Morty could see the whole planet beneath them, grey, silver, and golden where the light touched. He thought of how laughter once filled the air, and how silence had taken its place. But maybe silence wasn't emptiness. Maybe it was just the universe catching its breath. Rick looked out the window, eyes half closed. "The funny thing about quiet," he murmured, "is that it only sounds lonely when you're afraid of listening." The ship drifted onward, the stars spreading ahead like calm reflections on dark water. And somewhere below, in the world they left behind, the people kept humming, not loud, not joyful, but steady, a new kind of laughter, one that didn't need sound to exist. They drifted through a quiet stretch of space where no stars dared to shine. The ship hummed softly, like a living thing breathing in sleep. Morty sat by the viewport, watching faint glimmers flicker in the distance, dying embers of forgotten suns. Rick was silent at the console, tools scattered around him in precise disarray. He wasn't building something new exactly. He was rebuilding something old, an idea he had once left unfinished. Morty finally spoke. "What you working on, Rick?" Rick didn't look up.
A translator, Morty frowned.
"Like, for alien languages?" Rick gave a small shake of his head.
For dreams, Morty blinked.
"Dreams?"
Yeah. Rick adjusted a tiny circuit, his voice almost a whisper.
"You ever wonder what dreams sound like when they're not trapped inside a head?"
What they'd say if you could listen.
Morty leaned closer, the soft glow of the device reflecting in his eyes. It was shaped like a heart that had forgotten symmetry. He placed a thin metallic band on the table, a kind of neural link, faintly shimmering with soft blue energy. Every brain has echoes. Even when you're not dreaming, some part of you still hums in the dark.
This machine
can catch that hum. Morty hesitated.
You tried it before?
Rick's hand stilled. Once, a long time ago. He didn't say more and Morty didn't press. There was a weight in Rick's tone that didn't want to be touched. Something old. Something tired. After a while, Rick motioned toward the device. "You want to try?" Morty's eyes widened. "Me?"
Yeah, you got the kind of brain that still believes in stuff.
"The machine'll like that." Morty nodded slowly and slipped the band around his head.
A faint hum filled the air, then softened into a sound like distant waves.
His eyelids grew heavy, though he didn't fall asleep. It was more like the room was falling asleep around him. Rick adjusted the dials. The lights dimmed. Then from the machine a sound began to form. It wasn't music. Not exactly. It was softer. A rhythm made of sighs, whispers, and tiny, fragile notes that reminded Morty of rain against glass. "What's it saying?" he murmured. Rick watched the monitor flicker. "It's not language. It's emotion. The sound of everything you don't know how to say." Morty closed his eyes. The hum deepened. He saw flashes, a swing set from childhood, the feeling of running through tall grass, the soft laughter of a voice he couldn't quite remember. Then, stars, falling like raindrops across a mirror. He exhaled, a quiet tear slipping free without sadness, only warmth. When the sound faded, Morty opened his eyes. The ship's lights returned, the machine glowing faintly like an ember. "That was,"
he whispered.
"beautiful," Rick nodded, his expression unreadable. "Dreams usually are before you wake up." Morty turned to him. "You said you tried it before."
Whose dream was it then?
Rick stared at the machine, eyes distant. "Mine." There was a pause. Long, gentle, filled with things neither wanted to disturb. "What did you hear?" Morty asked quietly. Rick smiled faintly, that old weary smile that carried both pain and fondness. "Nothing, just silence. Turns out even my subconscious knows when to shut up." But Morty could tell that wasn't true. The way Rick looked at the machine, tenderly, almost like regret, said everything. After a moment, Rick stood, poured himself a drink, and leaned against the wall. "Dreams are strange, Morty. They're like time machines without coordinates. They don't take you somewhere new. They just take you back to the place you forgot mattered." Morty traced a finger along the smooth curve of the device. "Do you ever wish you could live in one?" Rick shrugged. "Living in a dream's easy. The hard part's remembering it without breaking." They sat in silence, the hum of the machine fading into the background. Outside, the stars began to reappear. One by one, small flickers awakening across the void. After a long while, Morty said, "Can we hear your dream again?" Rick hesitated. His hand hovered over the switch. Then, slowly, He nodded. He placed the band around his own head. The lights dimmed again, the air thick with a soft, vibrating stillness. The machine began to glow. Faintly at first, then brighter, pulsing in rhythm with Rick's heartbeat. The sound that emerged was different this time. It wasn't waves or rain. It was silence threaded with a child's laugh, distant, echoing, fragile. Then a voice, too soft to understand, but filled with something raw and human. Morty didn't move. He just listened. Rick's eyes stayed closed, his face calm, maybe calmer than Morty had ever seen it. When it ended, Rick took a slow breath and removed the band. The silence that followed felt alive. Morty swallowed.
Was that?
Rick nodded once, not meeting his eyes. Yeah, neither spoke after that. The machine flickered one last time and went still, its faint light settling into a quiet glow, like a candle that had done its job. Rick finally broke the silence. You can learn a lot from what your mind tries to say when you're not looking. Morty nodded, his voice barely audible. What do you think it means? Rick's gaze drifted to the stars outside. It means even the smartest man in the multiverse still dreams of home. The ship continued through the dark, guided not by stars but by memory. That invisible pull that always leads back to something softer than truth. The machine sat quietly on the table, its faint hum blending with the rhythm of the engines, and though neither of them spoke again, both could still hear it. That echo of dreams too gentle to die, lingering somewhere between sleep and space. There are places in the universe that move so slowly it's hard to tell if they're moving at all. Worlds caught in the quiet gravity of forgotten stars, circling endlessly, softly, as if afraid to disturb the silence that's kept them alive. Rick and Morty drifted through one of those places now. The ship's engines murmured at a low hum, half asleep. Outside the window stretched a field of pale blue light. Not stars exactly, but drifting fragments of what used to be them. Dust from ancient galaxies still glowing faintly in the dark. Morty leaned against the glass, his reflection faint beside the void.
It's kind of beautiful, he whispered. Rick grunted, half listening. You know what I call these, Morty?
Sad planets, Morty frowned softly. Sad planets. Rick nodded, eyes distant. Worlds that stopped trying, used to spin fast, used to shine bright, but somewhere along the way they just got tired. Now they drift slow.
Like they're waiting for something to forgive them. Morty's voice was quiet. Forgive them for what?
Rick didn't answer right away. He adjusted a lever, letting the ship glide closer to a small planet below, pale and blue like frost under moonlight. For forgetting how to laugh, maybe, or for thinking they had to be perfect to keep shining. The planet turned slowly beneath them. Its surface shimmered like glass, smooth and endless, as though the oceans had stilled mid-tide and never moved again. A silent sea, no waves, no wind, only reflection. They landed softly, the ship settling into a bed of white dust that sparkled like faint starlight. When the ramp lowered, a hush wrapped around them, not emptiness, but presence, the kind of silence that hums quietly, as though it's been listening for a very long time. Morty followed Rick through the stillness. The ground beneath their feet was soft, almost like sand, but lighter, more like the texture of ash or memory. There were shapes scattered across the plain. Structures, maybe once homes, now hollow and silvered by time. They shimmered faintly, and when the wind brushed past, they made a sound like glass chimes, fragile, fleeting, almost like a lullaby. Rick paused, resting his hand against one of them. It vibrated faintly under his touch. "Used to be a civilization here," he said softly. They built cities that floated on the sound of laughter. Pure acoustic resonance. Every joy turned into architecture. Morty looked around. So what happened? Rick's voice thinned. They forgot what they were laughing about. They kept walking. The sky above them shifted slowly from deep blue to violet, the stars moving like slow thoughts. Morty could feel the weight of the place, not heavy, but tender, like walking through someone else's memories. After a while, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. At its center was something vast, a sphere of faint golden light pulsing slowly like a sleeping heart. Rick sat down on the edge of the ridge, crossing his legs.
That's their memory core, he murmured. Every laugh, every story, every sound they ever made.
It's still beating. Just doesn't know why. Morty sat beside him, pulling his knees close.
Can we fix it?
Rick smiled faintly. Not everything broken needs fixing, Morty. Some things just need listening. They sat together, watching the soft rhythm of light pulse through the valley. Morty closed his eyes. The glow touched his face, warm and slow.
It's weird, he said after a while.
It doesn't feel sad.
It feels peaceful. Like it's finally okay not to shine so bright anymore. Rick tilted his head, considering.
Maybe sadness isn't the opposite of peace. Maybe it's just what happens when peace remembers how much it used to care. Morty looked at him.
Do you ever feel like that?
Rick exhaled, the sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh.
Kid, I live like that. The words hung softly between them.
Not heavy, just true. They stayed like that for a long time. Two small figures sitting on the edge of a planet that had forgotten motion. The air was cool and still, carrying no sound but the gentle hum of distant energy. Then Morty pointed toward the horizon.
Hey, Rick, look! In the distance, a tiny ripple passed through the golden core.
It shimmered once, faint, hesitant, but alive. The sound that followed was almost imperceptible, a single, gentle note, like the beginning of a lullaby. The valley responded with a soft echo.
Then another.
Then more, until the whole plain began to hum, resonating with the slow vibration of reborn laughter. Morty's eyes widened. It's waking up. Rick didn't move. He just smiled, the corners of his mouth barely lifting. Nah, it's remembering. The sound spread across the landscape, not loud, not joyous, just deeply calm. It was the sound of release, of a world finally forgiving itself for needing rest. Morty leaned back, lying against the ground. The hum vibrated through him, deep and soothing, like being cradled by the planet itself. Rick lit a small flask of phosphor wine and took a slow sip. You know, Morty, he murmured, most people think the universe runs on energy, but sometimes it runs on forgiveness. Morty smiled sleepily. Do you think it forgave us too? Rick looked out toward the golden sphere, which now pulsed brighter, its rhythm syncing with the stars above. If it hasn't yet, he said softly, it will. For a long while neither spoke. The world beneath them hummed like a distant heartbeat. The stars glowed with a quiet patience. Eventually, Morty's breathing slowed, his eyes fluttering shut. Rick didn't wake him. He just watched the sky, watched how, even in stillness, everything seemed to move in its own gentle way. He leaned back beside Morty and let his eyes close. The planet turned so slowly that you could almost believe it had stopped. And yet, if you waited long enough, you'd see it was still spinning. Always had been, and somewhere deep beneath the surface, the laughter continued. Soft, rhythmic, endless. There was once a joke Rick made, one so absurd, so layered in irony that even he couldn't explain why it was funny. It wasn't meant to mean anything, just one of those late-night murmurs whispered between dimensions after too many drinks and too much thinking. But sometimes, in the multiverse, meaning doesn't need permission. Words, like seeds, can fall into strange soil, and in some far-off pocket of existence, that joke began to grow, Rick and Morty found it by accident. They were drifting between dimensions again. Quiet.
Unhurried, when their ship's scanners picked up an odd pulse of frequency.
It wasn't cosmic radiation or dark matter, but something gentler, stranger.
A vibration that almost sounded like...
Laughter. Morty leaned toward the console.
Is that like someone laughing out there?
Rick didn't look up. Not someone, Morty. Something. He adjusted the coordinates, and with a low hum, the ship slid through a ribbon of light. When the glare faded, they saw it. A floating world made entirely of sound waves frozen in motion. Clouds shimmered in gentle ripples, like the after-echo of a punchline that had been laughed at for centuries. The ground beneath glowed with faint, rhythmic patterns, the residue of old laughter repeating itself, endlessly. Morty's eyes widened.
Rick, what is this place?
Rick smirked faintly. It's one of mine, he said it quietly, almost guiltily. Years ago, I made a joke about the universe being a bad improv sketch that forgot its cue cards.
Guess that punchline didn't like being laughed at. It
became self-aware. They stepped out into the atmosphere. It was soft, almost like walking through warm air after rain. Every step released a faint giggle under their feet, harmless and musical. The sky above shimmered like translucent silk, moving in slow ripples. Faces of light flickered within, not real faces, but the impressions of laughter itself, smiling and fading like ghosts of amusement. Morty reached out, his hand brushing one of them.
It's laughing us at me?
Rick shook his head. Not at you. Just laughing because that's all it knows how to do. They walked until they reached the edge of a wide, glowing lake. The surface shimmered with rhythmic pulses, each wave a memory of humor now looping endlessly without meaning. Rick crouched down, dipping his fingers into the glow. You see, Morty, he said, his voice unusually soft. Laughter's one of those things that doesn't like to be caged. It's supposed to come and go. But here, it never stopped. It kept repeating until it forgot what it was for. Morty knelt beside him. So it stuck. Rick nodded slowly, a joke that forgot to end. That's what this whole place is. The wind picked up, carrying faint echoes through the valley. Voices of infinite Ricks, infinite Mortys, all laughing at something they couldn't remember. Some sounded joyful, others hollow. Together, it felt like a lullaby woven from the fabric of irony. Morty looked around. It doesn't sound funny anymore. Rick smiled faintly.
That's the thing about jokes, kid.
They live off surprise. When you take the surprise away, all you have left is the echo. They sat together on the shore, the lake's glow reflecting softly on their faces. After a while, Morty asked, Do you think it ever meant something? Like, maybe the universe was trying to tell you something through the joke? Rick chuckled under his breath. Morty, I've spent a lifetime building universes out of accidents. If I start believing they're talking back, that's when I'll really lose it. He leaned back, eyes tracing the faint aurora above. Still, sometimes I wonder if humor's just another way the universe forgives itself. Maybe laughter's what happens when chaos finally decides it's okay being chaos. Morty smiled faintly, like when something's too big or too sad and you just...
Laugh? Rick nodded.
Exactly. They stayed like that, quiet, listening to the faint music of a world built from forgotten mirth. Every so often, a new ripple of sound would drift through, carrying the essence of some long-lost joke told by another version of Rick somewhere else. Eventually, Morty noticed something strange. The light around them was dimming, not fading, but softening, like the world itself was exhaling. The laughter grew quieter, its loops slowing, as though realizing how tired it had become. Morty frowned.
Rick, it's changing. Rick didn't move.
He just smiled sadly. Yeah, it's finally getting the punchline. What do you mean? Rick looked out at the shimmering lake, now calm as glass. The joke wasn't about the universe being ridiculous, Morty. It was about how it keeps going anyway. How we keep laughing, even when there's nothing left to laugh about. That's the real punchline. And it's beautiful. Morty stared at him, then at the quiet lake. The laughter had slowed to a heartbeat rhythm, one soft echo at a time. It didn't sound funny.
It sounded alive. Rick took a slow breath, his eyes heavy.
You know what the funniest thing about the multiverse is?
Every version of me thinks he's in on the joke. None of them realize they are the joke. Morty frowned, unsure how to respond. Rick chuckled gently.
Don't worry, Morty, that's not an insult.
It just means we matter, not because we understand, but because we try to. The wind whispered again, only this time it wasn't laughter.
It was silence. A soft, contented kind of quiet, like the moment right after someone finishes a story. Morty rested his chin on his knees. It's kind of nice. Peaceful, I guess, Rick nodded. Yeah, every joke ends eventually. But if you listen close enough, there's always a little bit of truth left in the air. He stood slowly, brushing off his coat. Come on, kid. Let's go before this place starts taking itself seriously again. Morty laughed lightly, standing beside him.
As they walked back toward the ship, the fading light followed them. Small golden motes drifting upward like dust, catching the last rays of day. When they reached the ramp, Morty looked back one last time.
The world that had been made from laughter was now quiet, glowing softly in the dark, like a memory that had finally learned to rest. Rick watched it too. His voice was barely above a whisper.
You know, Morty, maybe that's all any of us are.
Jokes the universe told itself, and then forgot why. And as they lifted off, the world below pulsed once more. A single, gentle ripple through space. It wasn't laughter this time. It was peace. Beyond the fields of laughter and the tides of cosmic mirth lay a drifting world, vast, weightless, and old as guilt. It was not made of matter, but of memory, a floating cathedral of reflections, where every wall hummed with the voices of things once said, choices once made, and versions once lived. The Citadel of Echoes. Rick and Morty approached it slowly, their ship gliding through the silence like a sigh through still air. The structure stretched endlessly in every direction, a spiral fortress woven from glass and sound. Every pane shimmered faintly, replaying scenes from infinite realities, versions of Rick arguing, inventing, losing, leaving. Morty's voice trembled.
Rick, are those all? Yeah. Rick didn't let him finish.
Versions of me, fragments, choices that didn't quite fade. As they landed, the ship's engines hummed a low, melancholy note. The sound was swallowed by the stillness, dissolving into the vast chamber beyond the landing bay.
Inside, it felt like standing within the echo of a dream.
Everything shimmered, not with light, but with recollection. Morty looked around, his footsteps gentle.
It's so quiet here.
Rick's reply came softer than usual.
Echoes aren't loud, Morty. They just wait for you to listen. They walked down a corridor that spiraled inward, walls breathing faint holograms of old lives.
Rick caught glimpses, almost 100 memories bleeding into each other. One Rick laughing in defiance.
Another crying in the dark.
One giving up.
One still building. Morty slowed, watching a flicker of a version of himself. Older, braver, eyes dim with experience. Standing beside a Rick that looked almost kind. Do you ever miss them? He asked quietly. Rick kept walking. Miss who?
The other versions of you. The ones that didn't end up like you. Rick paused for a long moment. The air between them felt like starlight stretched thin. You don't miss possibilities, Morty, he said finally. You just live with them humming in your head. They reached a vast open chamber at the heart of the Citadel. It was circular, surrounded by endless glass pillars. Each one held a single moment frozen in motion, a decision, a mistake, a fleeting joy. They shone faintly like lanterns suspended in a cosmic ocean. Rick approached one of them, his reflection splitting into hundreds of faint doubles in the mirrored glass. This place was supposed to be a sanctuary, he murmured. A place for all the Ricks to study each other, learn from their mistakes. He chuckled dryly. Turns out, when you put infinite versions of yourself together, you just build a louder echo chamber. Morty walked to another pillar.
Inside it shimmered a memory. A young Rick holding a baby Beth, eyes soft with love.
The scene looped quietly. "She's so little," Morty whispered. Rick's jaw tensed, his voice almost breaking. Yeah, that version. Still thought he could be a good father. Silence fell again. The chamber felt like a lullaby gone sad. A melody that once held warmth, but now only hummed faintly, trying to remember its rhythm. Rick turned toward the center of the room. There stood a circular pool, still reflective like liquid glass. From it came faint whispers layered like ripples of time. They were all voices of Ricks, talking, arguing, laughing, apologizing. Some were bitter.
Some sounded
tired. Morty stepped closer. "What is this?" Rick stared down at the reflection. It's the core memory. Every thought the Citadel ever recorded. Every version of me that ever questioned what the point of all this was. He knelt beside it, his face reflected in the mirrored surface, rippling with each breath. "You can spend eternity here, Morty, looking at yourself.
listening to yourself, trying to understand what went wrong."
But the thing about echoes," he paused, "is that they can't answer back." Morty sat beside him. The silence was heavy but gentle. "So why come here at all?" Rick looked up, eyes dim but distant. "Because even echoes deserve someone to hear them." They sat for a long time. The pool shimmered softly, showing flickers of infinite worlds, Ricks who saved everything, Ricks who destroyed everything, and Ricks who just walked away. Then, from the depths of the reflection, something changed. The whispers quieted. A single voice rose, calm, steady, almost human. It wasn't angry or ironic. It was simply tired. "Stop looking," it said. Rick froze.
What? The reflection rippled.
Another Rick appeared in the water, his eyes calm, almost peaceful. "You've spent lifetimes trying to rewrite yourself," the reflection said. "Every version of you keeps running from the same silence. You built this citadel not to remember, but to avoid forgetting." Morty blinked.
Is that...
Rick didn't answer. He just stared at his own image. The voice continued, softer now. "You think knowledge will save you. It won't. It'll just teach you how to describe the pain." The words lingered in the air like a soft ache. Morty reached out to touch the surface, but Rick stopped him gently. His hand trembled.
Don't, Morty, this isn't for you. For the first time, Morty saw something in Rick's eyes that looked like fear. Not of danger, but of recognition. The reflection smiled faintly.
"You've done enough, Rick. Go home." The pool stilled again. The voice faded, leaving only the hum of the citadel breathing in silence. Rick stood slowly, his movements quiet and careful, as if afraid to disturb the peace that had just settled. Morty looked at him. "You okay?" Rick exhaled.
"Yeah, just..."
"Tired of hearing myself think." They began walking back toward the corridor. The light around them dimmed, fading to a soft blue glow. For the first time, the citadel sounded empty, not haunted, just resting. As they neared the exit, Morty asked softly, "Do you think echoes ever stop?" Rick's voice came like a sigh. "No, Morty, they just fade until they sound like silence. And that's close enough." Outside, the ship waited quietly. As they lifted off, the citadel shimmered below them, each glass pillar flickering like candlelight before gently going dark. From above, it looked almost peaceful, a constellation of memories finally learning how to rest. Morty leaned his head against the window, watching the reflections drift away into the void. Rick sat at the controls, silent for once. His eyes were fixed on nothing, but in the quiet hum of the ship there was a strange calm, the kind that comes after finally listening to something that's been whispering your name for years. For a long time, they flew without words. And somewhere behind them, the citadel of echoes stopped murmuring. It didn't vanish. It just grew quiet enough to finally let the universe breathe. The stars hung low that night, pale, unblinking witnesses to the weight of memory.
Rick and Morty drifted through the soft black of space in near silence, the hum of the ship like the steady rhythm of a sleeping heart.
Neither spoke for a long while. The citadel of echoes had left something unspoken between them, an invisible residue of reflection. Every word now seemed too loud, every thought too fragile to disturb. Then softly, Morty broke the silence.
Rick, where do we go next?
Rick's eyes stayed on the endless horizon of starlight. Home, maybe, if we can remember which one's real. But the portal gun, as if it had a will of its own, flickered gently, a soft pull toward a quiet world. Rick hesitated, then sighed and opened it. The doorway rippled, shimmering in hues of gentle violet. They stepped through. The air on the other side was warm, almost golden. They stood on a small planet with two suns low on the horizon, painting the landscape in soft amber light. Grass whispered beneath their feet, tall and silver like threads of memory. In the distance, a small house rested by a stream that glowed faintly, as if moonlight lived within it. Rick paused, brow furrowing.
This place.
Morty looked up.
You've been here before. Not me, Rick muttered.
But maybe a version of me. The door of the house opened, and a woman stepped out. Her face was calm, gentle, and achingly familiar. Beth. But not quite his Beth. There was something different in her eyes, an endlessness, a knowing that stretched beyond the boundaries of one life. She smiled softly when she saw them.
You finally came, Morty froze. Beth, she nodded.
In this world, yes, but not the one you remember. Her gaze lingered on Rick. You built this place once, didn't you? A refuge outside time? You wanted to forget, Rick's voice faltered.
So you remember all of it?
Beth's expression didn't change.
Every version.
Every goodbye.
Every time you left, every time you didn't. The multiverse doesn't erase memories, Rick. It just scatters them. Some of us learn how to keep them. She turned, gesturing for them to follow.
Inside, the house was simple. Wooden floors, quiet light filtering through paper windows, the scent of something warm on the air. A kettle whistled softly on the stove. Morty sat, unsure whether to speak. Rick stood by the window, eyes distant. Beth poured tea into 3 small cups, her movements unhurried. Do you ever get tired of running from yourself? She asked gently. Rick gave a small, humorless smile. If I stopped running, I'd have to remember. Beth sat across from him. Then maybe it's time. The room grew still. Only the faint burble of the stream outside filled the quiet, a sound like old lullabies half remembered in sleep. Morty finally asked, "What's it like? Remembering everything?" Beth looked at him, eyes full of something both beautiful and unbearable. It's like standing in a storm made of mirrors. Every reflection shows you who you could have been. You want to look away, but the light keeps finding you. Rick watched her carefully.
And you're not angry after everything?
She smiled, not with joy, but with an old tenderness.
Anger fades faster than love, Dad, even across realities. He looked down.
The tea steamed quietly between them. His hands trembled faintly as he lifted the cup. For a long time, he said nothing. Then quietly, "I thought I was protecting you. By not being there?" Beth's voice was soft, steady. "Maybe you were. But you were also protecting yourself from what it means to stay." Outside, the suns were setting, the sky deepening into gentle twilight, colors dissolving like ink in water. Morty stepped to the window, watching the light fold over the hills. "It's beautiful here," he murmured. Beth nodded. "Beauty's what's left when memory forgives itself." Rick let out a faint laugh, not sharp or bitter, but weary, almost childlike. "You talk like a philosopher." Beth tilted her head. "You made me that way once." "In one of the timelines," he smiled faintly. "Sounds like something I'd do." As the evening deepened, they stepped outside together. The grass shimmered in starlight. A faint wind moved through the valley, carrying with it the soft hum of the stream. Rick and Beth stood beside it, the water glowing faintly between them. "Every version of you," Beth said quietly, "was chasing something, a formula, a purpose, a reason. But I think the truth is simpler." Rick looked at her. "And what's that?" "You just didn't want to be alone with what you remembered." The words settled in the air like dust on glass, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. Rick looked down at the stream. The reflection there shimmered and split, showing not one Rick, but many, each from a different life, each carrying the same tired eyes. For a moment, he thought he saw them all turn toward him at once, their expressions softening, not with pity, but understanding. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the reflection had returned to one. Beth stepped closer. "You can stop running, you know."
"Even if it's just for a while," Rick's voice broke on a whisper.
"If I stop, I don't know what's left of me," Beth smiled gently. "Maybe that's where you start." The night deepened. The first stars rose slow and solemn. Morty lay in the grass nearby, eyes half closed, listening to the quiet rhythm of their voices, like listening to time, learning how to breathe again. Beth looked up at the stars. "Do you know what the multiverse sounds like when it sleeps?" Rick shook his head. "Like this," she said softly, "a memory trying to forgive itself." They stood there until the second sun faded, leaving only the cool glow of starlight. The air was full of calm, the kind that follows truth, not victory. When they finally turned to leave, Beth didn't follow. She simply smiled, that same steady warmth in her eyes. "You'll forget this place when you wake. That's how it works. But maybe you'll remember the feeling." Rick hesitated, then nodded. "That's enough." They stepped through the portal, the house and valley dissolving into light behind them. As they drifted once more through the quiet dark, Morty spoke softly. "She remembered everything, Rick, and she wasn't angry. She was just peaceful." Rick leaned back in his seat, eyes heavy. "Peace isn't forgetting, Morty. It's remembering without needing to fix it." The ship moved on, slow and steady through the hush of space. And somewhere far behind them, on that quiet golden world, a woman who remembered every version looked up at the stars, smiling faintly,
as if listening to an echo that had finally learned how to rest. The ship drifted through a silence so wide it seemed to erase even thought.
Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, pinpoints of light floating in oceans of stillness. Morty watched them from his seat, chin resting on his hands, eyes half-lidded. Rick sat at the console, though he wasn't really piloting anymore. The ship had been on autopilot for hours, following coordinates Rick never remembered entering. There was no particular destination this time, just the slow movement through nothing, a kind of wandering that felt almost like peace. "Rick," Morty said softly, his voice barely carrying through the cabin. "Where are we going?" Rick didn't look up.
"Nowhere, kid." Maybe that's the point. The hum of the ship deepened, like a low breath drawn by the universe itself.
Morty leaned back, feeling the faint vibration under his palms. Steady, rhythmic, like the pulse of something ancient. "Do you think," he asked, "that every version of us ends up somewhere like this?" Rick finally turned, his gaze slow, tired, and strangely kind. Not every version gets the chance to stop moving. Most of them just keep chasing the next answer, the next joke, the next bottle. You and me. We got lucky, the boy smiled faintly. Lucky feels weird when everything's so empty. Rick's lips curved into something between a smile and a sigh. Emptiness isn't always bad, Morty. Sometimes it's the only place where you can hear what's still alive inside you. They fell quiet again. The stars outside seemed to pulse, slow and deliberate, like they were breathing too. Hours passed that way. The ship's path curved gently toward a faint glow ahead. Not bright, not burning, just there. It was a single light, soft as a candle in an endless sea of dark. Morty straightened up. Hey, what's that? Rick adjusted a few controls. The scanner showed nothing. No coordinates, no energy readings, just that one glowing point. It's not on any map, Rick murmured. Looks like
a star, but as they approached, it didn't grow larger.
It didn't move at all. It simply stayed where it was, suspended between moments, glowing without reason. When they drew close enough for the viewport to fill with its light, something strange happened. The ship stopped.
Not because Rick touched anything, it just stopped.
The engines hummed, the panels flickered softly, but they were no longer drifting. The light held them in place, not by force, but by invitation. Rick rose slowly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. He stepped closer to the glass, his reflection merging with the soft white glow beyond it.
That's not a star, he whispered.
It's something else, Morty joined him. It's beautiful. The light shimmered gently, not flickering, not burning, just existing. A calm presence in a universe that never seemed to pause. It didn't seem to want attention. It just was. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence filled the space between them like a soft blanket. Then Morty said, "It's not moving." Rick nodded. Yeah, most light travels somewhere. But this one, it's just staying. He stared longer, his eyes softening. You know what's funny, Morty? I've seen every kind of energy there is. Cosmic radiation, interdimensional echoes, even the memory traces left by dead timelines. But this
feels still.
Like it doesn't want to go anywhere. Morty tilted his head.
So, it's lazy light?
Rick chuckled, a quiet, almost tender sound. Maybe. Or maybe it's light that's finally done running. They sat on the floor of the ship, the light still bathing everything in a calm glow. The shadows disappeared. Every corner of the cabin was touched by the same quiet brightness. Not harsh, not blinding, but perfectly balanced. Morty rested his head against the window.
It feels,
safe. Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, like it's seen everything and just decided to stop caring about distance. He pulled out his flask, looked at it for a long while, then set it down unopened. I used to think motion was proof of life, he said. That if you're still, you're fading. But this, he gestured toward the light, this feels more alive than anything I've built. Morty closed his eyes. Do you think it remembers where it came from? Rick's answer came after a pause. Maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe it's enough to just be, the boy smiled faintly.
That's kind of nice. Time softened around them.
The ship's hum slowed to a low, almost musical vibration. The light outside didn't move, but somehow it felt like it was breathing with them. Inhaling when they did, exhaling when they sighed. Rick leaned back,
arms folded behind his head, staring at it through half-lidded eyes.
You know, he murmured, I once tried to create a universe powered by stillness. No entropy, no decay, no noise, just quiet energy forever. It didn't work. Everything either froze or fell apart. Morty frowned slightly. So, what makes this one different? Rick thought for a long while before answering. Maybe it's not trying to last forever.
Maybe it's just
resting. That word, resting, hung in the air like a prayer. Morty whispered, Do you think we could stay here for a bit? Rick smiled softly. Yeah, just for a bit. They didn't move for what felt like hours, maybe longer. There was no time where the light was. Only the rhythm of their breathing, the quiet hum of something ancient and kind watching over them. Eventually Morty spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. You said once that home isn't a place, it's a person.
But what if it's this? Just
Peace. Rick didn't answer at first. He looked at the boy beside him. Older now, calmer, eyes no longer searching for what they'd already found. Finally, he said, maybe home is wherever you stop needing to go somewhere else. Morty smiled. Then I think we're home, Rick. Rick gave a small nod. Yeah, kid.
maybe we are. Outside the light pulsed once, just once, as if in quiet acknowledgement.
Then it returned to its stillness, shining softly in the eternal dark. Rick leaned back and closed his eyes. Funny thing about light, he murmured, his voice slow, almost fading. It doesn't have to move to matter.
It just has to be seen. Morty whispered something. Thank you, maybe, and drifted off to sleep against the cool glass. Rick sat there a little longer, watching the unmoving glow.
For once, he didn't think about equations or guilt or timelines.
He didn't think at all, he just watched.
And breathed. And somewhere in that endless quiet, between the hum of the ship and the heartbeat of the still light, he realized he'd stopped running without even meaning to. The light stayed. The ship stayed. Time stayed. And for the first time in a very long while, that was enough. It began quietly, like most strange things do, not with a flash or a scream or an explosion, but with silence, the kind that hums just beneath the surface of reality, the kind that tells you something has shifted, even if you can't say what. The ship was parked in the orbit of a sleeping world. Below, the planet glowed faintly blue, covered in calm oceans that seemed to breathe in slow rhythm with the stars. Morty was asleep in the passenger seat, his hand still holding an open notebook filled with little sketches. Strange planets, half-remembered jokes, and something that looked like a door with light behind it. Rick sat at the console, eyes unfocused. The lights around him blinked in soft pulses, like heartbeats he could no longer sync to. His reflection in the viewport didn't quite line up with him. It moved just slightly out of time, like a delayed echo. For a moment, he thought it was just another side effect of too little sleep. Then quietly, the thought came to him. Who am I again?
It wasn't panic, not yet.
It was curiosity. Like the question had been waiting for a calm enough night to ask itself aloud. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had built universes, held bottles, fixed broken things and broken fixed ones. They felt heavy, familiar, but not owned. He whispered, almost amused, Rick Sanchez. Right? The name felt strange on his tongue, too formal, too defined, like a label on a jar that no longer contained what it used to. Outside, the blue planet turned slowly. The light from its atmosphere painted his face in waves. Soft, then dim, then soft again. He stood and walked to the back of the ship, where the hum of the engines blended with the quiet murmur of space. Everything was in its place. The scattered tools, the half-built gadgets, the empty flask lying sideways on the table. Yet it all felt slightly off, as though someone else had arranged it, trying to imitate his habits. He reached for the flask, turned it in his hand, and stared at his reflection in the curve of the metal. The face that looked back was older than he remembered, the eyes softer, the lines around them not just from laughter or anger, but from time. He took a breath, slow, deliberate, and for a fleeting second, he didn't know if he was this Rick or one of the others. The multiverse had a way of blurring things.
Maybe, he thought, It had finally blurred him too. A faint sound pulled him back. Morty, stirring in his sleep.
The boy murmured something and turned, his head resting against the seat. Rick watched him for a long time, the way one watches a candle flame on a cold night. Fragile, steady, unaware of its own warmth. He sat back down and whispered, "Morty." The name felt real, like an anchor thrown into the vastness. "Yeah, Morty." He repeated it again, slower this time, as if reminding himself of gravity. The ship lights dimmed automatically, responding to the approaching dawn on the planet below. It wasn't truly dawn, just reflected sunlight bending lazily through the atmosphere, but it gave the illusion of morning. Rick leaned back, letting his head rest against the cool surface of the chair. He tried to recall the chain of things that had led here. The portal seeds, the Citadel, the laughter that had turned to silence, the light that refused to move, the star that stayed. Each memory surfaced gently, like bubbles rising from deep water. Yet every time he reached for one, it slipped away, replaced by another version.
Another him. He closed his eyes and tried to focus.
"I'm Rick," he whispered again.
I'm Rick Sanchez, genius, inventor, realist.
His voice softened.
Grandfather. But the words fell flat.
They felt like old clothes that no longer fit. Morty murmured something in his sleep again, a word Rick couldn't quite catch. It sounded like home. That word lingered. It pulled something loose in him, something small, hidden, almost forgotten. He saw flashes, not from the lab, not from the portals, but from a kitchen. A soft voice calling him for breakfast. A little girl's laughter. The smell of toast. He remembered how warm mornings used to feel before he started chasing the cold edges of the universe, and for the first time in a long time, he realized he didn't remember why he left. He opened his eyes slowly. The planet below shimmered. The oceans moved like breath. He stood, opened the hatch, and let the faint glow of atmosphere spill inside. It wrapped around him, gentle, forgiving. "Maybe," he murmured. "Names don't matter much after all." Morty's voice, sleepy and soft, came from behind him. "Rick, you okay?" Rick turned slightly. The boy was rubbing his eyes, his hair messy, his voice thick with sleep. "Yeah," Rick said quietly. "Just thinking." "About what?" Rick looked out at the glowing blue world, then at the faint reflection of his face beside Morty's. "About how sometimes we forget who we are. And maybe that's not always bad." Morty tilted his head.
That sounds like something you'd say right before saying something sad, Rick smiled.
"Nah, just something true." The boy came to stand beside him, both of them watching the world turn. "Looks peaceful down there," Morty said. "It is," Rick replied. "Some places just know how to rest." They stood in silence. The air felt lighter here, like the universe itself was exhaling. After a long pause, Morty said quietly, "You ever wish you could forget everything?"
Start clean?
Rick thought about it.
Sometimes.
"But then I remember, forgetting doesn't mean peace. It just means you have to find it again," Morty nodded. "Yeah, but maybe finding it's the point," Rick smiled, a small, real one this time. "Maybe it is, kid."
Maybe it is. They watched as the light shifted, soft and pale, washing the cabin in warmth that wasn't quite sunlight, but felt close enough. Rick leaned his head back again, eyes half closed.
The question from earlier floated back to him. Who am I again? This time, the answer came gently, without words. It wasn't about the name, or the past, or the weight of what he'd done. It was about the stillness, the quiet presence beside him, the shared silence between two travelers who had finally stopped running. He breathed out, slow and steady. Maybe, he thought, identity isn't something you hold on to. Maybe it's something you return to whenever the world is quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. Outside, the blue planet continued to turn. Inside, Two shadows rested in the soft light. One young, one old, both part of something that didn't need definition. Rick closed his eyes again. He didn't need to remember his name. For now, being here, breathing still, was enough. The stars hummed quietly outside the window, and the ship floated in the rhythm of that calm music. And somewhere in that silence, the universe whispered back his name, not as a label, but as a memory of being alive. The morning after the blue planet drifted from view, the ship felt different.
Not broken, not heavy.
Just quieter, as though something inside it, or inside them, had exhaled for the first time in a long while. Rick sat at the control panel, adjusting nothing in particular. The screens glowed softly, casting faint halos on his face. Morty sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by empty snack wrappers and the fragments of a half-finished drawing, something between a star map and a dream. For a while, neither of them spoke. Space moved around them in slow waves, black and silver, infinite and close. Then, without looking up, Morty said, "You ever laugh so hard you forget what you were sad about?" Rick tilted his head.
That a trick question?
Morty shrugged. "I don't know.
I was just thinking, sometimes the universe feels like that.
Maybe it's all one big joke and we just keep missing the punchline." Rick stared at him for a long time. Then, softly, unexpectedly, he laughed. Not the sharp, cynical laugh that usually carried a hint of glass, but something smaller, rounder, almost human. Morty blinked. "What's funny?" Rick rubbed the back of his neck. "You are, kid. You just described quantum absurdity without even trying. Quantum."
What now?
Rick smiled faintly.
Nothing.
"Just means the joke's been running since before time started." Morty frowned, pretending to think deeply.
That sounds like something only you would find funny. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed.
"Maybe. But that's the thing about cosmic humor. It's not about laughter. It's about relief. About realizing none of this, the stars, the mistakes, the names, ever needed to make sense." For a moment, neither said anything. The silence between them stretched thin but comfortable, like an old blanket. Rick's mind wandered, not through equations or galaxies this time, but memories. He remembered a night long ago when he had built a machine to simulate happiness. It was a simple concept, input sadness, output laughter. But the machine never worked. It kept producing silence instead, as if it knew that true laughter can't be manufactured. He smiled at the memory, a quiet curve of his lips. "You know," he said, "I once tried to make a machine that could laugh." Morty looked up, eyes wide. "What happened?" "It refused," Rick said, chuckling under his breath.
It kept saying, laughter requires surrender. I didn't program it to say that, by the way. It just
"Did? That's creepy," Morty said, grinning. "Yeah, creepy and true." They both laughed then, a sound that filled the cabin with warmth. Outside, the stars seemed to shimmer a little brighter, like they were listening in. After the laughter faded, Morty's tone softened.
You think the universe ever laughs at us?
Rick thought for a long moment.
All the time, he said finally.
But not in a mean way, more like in wonder. Like it's surprised we keep trying, even when we know how small we are. Morty nodded slowly, absorbing the thought. So it's not laughing at us, it's laughing with us? Rick smiled. Something like that. Maybe the universe just enjoys company. The navigation system hummed quietly. A new set of coordinates blinked on the screen, a soft pulse of golden light, inviting, uncertain. Morty pointed at it. Where's that? Rick squinted. Nowhere special. Just an old signal. Been bouncing around for centuries. Probably static. Can we go there? Rick hesitated. You really want to follow a joke from the universe? Morty shrugged, smiling. Why not?
Maybe it's funny. Rick looked at the boy, then at the empty stretch of stars ahead.
There was something pure about Morty's curiosity. something that reminded him of the way he used to see things before he tried to explain them all away. "All right," Rick said softly.
Let's see how funny it gets. The ship hummed to life, gentle and steady.
The stars outside began to shift, sliding past like slow-moving memories. The coordinates led them through a quiet corridor of space, a place where the light bent in graceful arcs and time itself seemed to hum in rhythm with their breath. Then suddenly the ship stopped, not abruptly, more like it had drifted into a soft pillow of stillness. Before them floated something strange, a small, shimmering sphere of light, no larger than a human heart. It pulsed faintly, radiating a kind of warmth that wasn't physical, but deeply familiar. Morty whispered, "What is that?" Rick stared. "A cosmic echo," he said after a pause. A leftover thought. Sometimes when a civilization laughs, truly laughs, hard enough, the sound gets trapped in the fabric of space. Becomes light. That's beautiful, Morty said quietly. They drifted closer. The sphere's glow reflected in their eyes. It shimmered softly, and for a second, Rick could swear he heard something be a faint sound, like distant laughter carried through an endless hallway. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't loud. It was
kind. Rick reached out, his hand hovering near the light.
It felt like touching the memory of joy, or with the kind that doesn't need a reason. He smiled again, quietly. "You know, Morty," he murmured, "this might actually be the funniest thing that ever happened." "What?" "That the universe, after all its chaos and noise, remembers laughter more than anything else." Morty looked up at him, his expression soft.
Maybe that's what we're supposed to leave behind," Rick nodded.
"Maybe." They sat there for a long time, watching the little sphere flicker. The ship drifted weightlessly, surrounded by the slow music of distant stars. The laughter, or whatever it was, echoed faintly through the hull, as though the universe itself was breathing in rhythm with them. After a while, Morty said, "You think it'll ever fade?" Rick shook his head.
"No, real laughter doesn't fade."
"It just changes shape." Morty leaned back in his seat, smiling. "Then I hope the universe never stops laughing." Rick looked at him, eyes calm and tired, but peaceful. "It won't. Not as long as someone's around to remember the joke." The light dimmed slowly, like the ending of a dream. The ship turned gently, moving onward through the quiet black. The stars seemed to follow, whispering their invisible stories. Inside, the air felt soft again, a silence that wasn't empty, but full. Rick closed his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't thinking, building, or explaining. He was simply being. Somewhere in the distance, that faint, eternal laughter echoed again, the sound of existence reminding itself how beautiful it is to let go. And in that laughter, Rick felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. The universe had never been this quiet. Outside the window, the stars no longer rushed past. They lingered, suspended like fireflies in a jar of eternity. Each one glowed faintly, as if the entire cosmos had decided to breathe slower, to soften its pulse. Rick sat with his feet on the console, eyes half open, a soft hum in his throat that didn't quite become a tune. Morty was dozing in the co-pilot chair, his head tilted toward the glass, his reflection floating gently among constellations. They had been traveling for what felt like forever, but there was no sense of distance anymore, just stillness, the kind that seeps into you until it becomes part of your heartbeat. "Hey, kid," Rick said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a whisper meant for the stars more than for Morty. "You awake?" Morty stirred, blinking slowly.
"Sort of. Are we anywhere yet?"
Rick looked out at the expanse before them, a soft, golden haze stretching beyond sight. It wasn't light the way sunlight was.
It didn't burn or blind.
It was the kind of light that felt like a memory, yeah, he said after a pause. We're somewhere. The ship glided into the haze. No alarms, no hum of engines, just the sound of existence, vast and tender. The glow seeped through the glass, wrapping everything in a calm, almost sacred stillness. Morty rubbed his eyes. What is this place? Rick leaned forward, elbows on his knees. A star nursery, he murmured, but not like the ones we've seen before. This isn't where stars are born.
It's where they come to rest. Morty's eyes widened.
Rest like die? Rick shook his head gently.
No, not death, just rest.
Even light gets tired after traveling forever. The words floated between them, slow and heavy, sinking into the quiet. The ship's scanners flickered softly, showing vast orbs of fading color. Reds turned amber. Whites turned gold. Each one pulsed like a heartbeat slowing down, each one releasing a warmth that wasn't heat, but comfort. Morty pressed a hand against the glass.
It's beautiful, Rick smiled faintly.
Yeah, the universe has a funny way of ending things beautifully. They drifted deeper into the light.
Outside, some of the stars had already dimmed to a whisper.
Their glow wasn't gone. It had simply folded inward, becoming something else. Morty watched one of them fade, his breath fogging the window.
Do you think they know it's over?
Rick thought for a moment before answering.
I think they know it's enough. The boy looked at him, confused but thoughtful.
Rick continued, his voice softer now. When you've burned for billions of years, when you've given warmth to everything you can reach, eventually you stop needing to shine. You just rest.
And that's not an ending. It's peace. Morty leaned back, letting the thoughts settle inside him.
The light from outside fell gently across his face, painting him in soft gold.
I didn't know the universe could be this quiet. Rick chuckled faintly.
It's always been this quiet, Morty. We just talk too loud to hear it. They sat in silence again, the kind of silence that feels alive. Rick reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small glass vial. Inside it shimmered a faint glow, a piece of starlight he'd collected long ago. He turned it slowly in his hand. Never thought I'd come back here, he murmured. Morty glanced over. You been here before? Rick nodded. Once, a long time ago, before you.
Before all the running. I used to come here when I wanted to remember that I wasn't the only thing in the universe trying to stop. Morty frowned softly. Trying to stop what?
Rick looked down at the vial.
Everything, the boy said nothing.
He didn't need to. The ship drifted onward through clouds of soft gold vapor. Once a dying star pulsed just beside them, its light flickering like the last breath of a dream. Morty stared, mesmerized, and whispered, It looks like it's smiling. Rick followed his gaze. For the briefest moment, he saw it too. The faint curve of light, bending like a serene farewell. Maybe it is, he said. They stayed there for what felt like hours, or days, or neither. Time didn't move here.
It only breathed. Eventually, Morty spoke again. Rick.
What happens to the light when it finally fades? Rick's eyes softened.
It doesn't fade. Just finds another way to exist. Maybe as warmth. Maybe as memory.
Maybe as the sound of someone laughing on a planet far away. Morty nodded slowly, letting the image settle.
So it's like...
The universe remembers it? Rick smiled. The universe remembers everything that learns how to rest. Outside, one of the last glowing orbs dimmed completely, its shimmer melting into the surrounding haze. For a moment, everything went still. Then, faintly, the haze itself began to glow brighter, as if absorbing the last spark and carrying it forward. Morty whispered, It's beautiful. Rick's eyes lingered on the light, his voice barely a breath. It's home. They watched until the glow became too soft to distinguish from the dark. For once, Rick didn't rush to leave. He turned off the ship's systems entirely. The hum of machinery fell silent, leaving only the faint rhythm of their breathing and the heartbeat of a resting universe. the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything they'd seen, everything they'd let go of. Morty looked over at Rick. The man's eyes were closed, his expression calm.
"Rick?"
He whispered. "Yeah?
"Do you ever—"
Want to rest?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He just sat there, the starlight reflecting off his silver hair like a ghost of laughter. Then finally, softly, timely said, "Every day. But I think the trick is learning to rest without stopping." Morty nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He just felt the truth in it, like a melody that doesn't need words. The haze outside began to thin, revealing once again the deep stretch of space. But it didn't look the same anymore. The darkness wasn't cold now. It was gentle, cradling the ship like a blanket. Rick turned on the engines. They hummed quietly to life. "Where to next?" Morty asked. Rick smiled faintly. "No idea. But wherever it is, we'll take our time getting there." As the ship drifted away from the glowing nursery, the last resting star shimmered one final time, a slow, loving farewell, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the universe exhale. Beyond the quiet nursery of fading stars, space unfolded into something even gentler. A darkness that wasn't emptiness, but depth. It stretched endlessly, yet felt close, like being wrapped inside a dream that didn't need to end. Rick guided the ship forward with slow precision, one hand loosely on the controls. The lights on the dashboard were dimmed, pulsing like the heartbeat of some sleeping creature. Morty sat beside him, chin propped on his hand, eyes half-lidded. They had been traveling for so long that time had stopped being a measure. It was simply a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, silence. "Feels like we're flying through nothing," Morty said, softly. Rick gave a small nod. "Yeah, that's how you know you're close." "Close to what?" Rick didn't answer right away. He just watched the dark ahead, the way it shimmered faintly like oil on still water. "The last universe," he said finally. "Place where all the others fold themselves to sleep." Morty frowned slightly. "You mean like the end of everything?" Rick shook his head. "Not an end.
More like—"
A rest stop. They drifted forward. Outside, the dark began to shift. Slow currents of starlight flowing like mist. Tiny embers floated in the black, each one the faint remnant of a world long gone. They weren't dying. They were resting, dissolving gently into the fabric of what had come before. The ship hummed softly, and Morty leaned back in his seat.
"It's weird," he murmured.
"I always thought the end of the universe would be loud."
Explosions, colors, everything collapsing. But this, it's so quiet." Rick smiled faintly. "That's because you're thinking like someone who's still alive."
"The universe doesn't end with noise, Morty. It ends with understanding." They floated deeper, and the scenery around them began to glow. Not from light, but from memory. Shapes of worlds shimmered faintly in the distance, the ghost of a planet, the faint outline of a galaxy. They were made not of matter, but of echoes, soft reflections of things that once were. Rick slowed the ship. "This is it," he whispered. Morty pressed a hand to the glass. "It's beautiful," Rick nodded.
"Every universe leaves behind something."
"A laugh, a song, a dream. This is where it all goes. The last universe doesn't make new things. It keeps the things that mattered." Morty watched as the faint glow drifted past. A spiral of golden dust that pulsed softly, then vanished into the void. "Do you think we'll be remembered like that too?" Rick looked at him, not with the sharpness of a scientist, but the tenderness of someone who'd finally stopped running from himself. "Yeah," he said after a while, "but not by the universe."
By each other, they sat in silence again.
The kind of silence that feels like forgiveness. The ship entered a slow orbit around a faint light in the distance, a sphere, no larger than a city, glowing softly at the heart of the void. It wasn't a star, not really. It was smoother, warmer, pulsing like a living thought. Morty squinted. "What is that?" Rick leaned closer, his eyes reflecting the light. "The last idea," he murmured. "The one that held everything together when everything else let go." "The last idea?" "Yeah. Every universe starts with a thought, something small, fragile, hopeful. That thought echoes through time, builds worlds, births stars. When it's done, it comes here. It rests." Morty tilted his head. "What do you think it is?" Rick stared at the sphere for a long moment, then smiled faintly.
"I think it's love," Morty blinked.
"Love? That's—"
"Not what I expected," Rick shrugged.
"Most people don't. But what else could make everything keep going over and over through every mistake and every loss? You strip the math, the atoms, the multiverses. All that's left is the want to keep someone close. That's the core of it all." The light shimmered softly, as if agreeing. Morty whispered, "It's warm." Rick adjusted a few dials, bringing the ship closer. The glow filled the cabin, washing everything in a soft gold. The light wasn't harsh. It felt alive, pulsing with every breath they took. As they drew near, Morty felt something. Not sound, not sight, but a presence. Memories surfaced in flashes, all their adventures, all their arguments, every quiet moment between chaos. The laughter, the fear, the unspoken care. He felt it all at once. Rick's voice was low. "This is what the multiverse remembers of us, Morty. Every version of us."
"Every choice, every joke, every silence." Morty swallowed, his eyes glistening faintly. "Do you think—"
"They're happy? All those other Ricks and Mortys?" Rick exhaled slowly.
Maybe happiness was never about the versions. Maybe it's about moments."
"You can't live in them forever, but you can carry them long enough to light the dark." Morty didn't answer. He just watched the light, feeling smaller and calmer than he ever had. The ship floated quietly around the glowing sphere. Outside, trails of soft dust followed them like fading stardust footprints. Rick reached out and placed his hand on the console, almost reverently.
"I think this is where we stop," he said softly. Morty looked at him, a flicker of fear and understanding passing through his expression. "Stop, like, really stop?"
Rick smiled.
"Not die, Morty, just stop running. For once." They both sat there, letting the idea sink in. The light outside pulsed again. Slow, rhythmic, like the beat of a heart.
And as it did, something changed inside the ship. The hum grew softer, the air warmer, the shadows deeper. It was as if the universe itself was exhaling, and they were being carried with it. Morty felt drowsy, his eyelids heavy. The glow from outside moved across his face like a lullaby. "Rick," he murmured, "what happens after this?" Rick's answer came slow, like a thought finding its way through water.
"After this?"
"We rest, Morty, maybe not forever. Just long enough to remember what peace feels like." Morty's eyes closed, his voice barely a whisper. "And then?" Rick looked out at the golden sphere, his reflection faintly trembling in the light. "Then maybe we dream again." Outside, the light flickered one last time, and the darkness seemed to smile. The last universe didn't close. It simply folded its arms around them, holding them gently, like a memory refusing to fade. Inside the ship, Rick leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. The bottle of starlight he'd kept so long sat glowing on the console beside him. For the first time, he didn't need to fix anything. He didn't need to escape or explain or win. He just breathed, and in that breath the multiverse felt whole. The ship drifted through silence so complete it felt like a memory of sound. The faint hum that had always followed them, the heartbeat of machinery, the gentle vibration of motion, had faded into stillness. Only the glow of the golden sphere remained behind them, shrinking softly into the distance until it became just another faint shimmer among the endless dark. Morty stirred first. His eyes opened slowly, The kind of slow where waking up doesn't mean leaving a dream, just noticing it from a new angle. The light outside painted him in silver, and his reflection floated beside him on the glass. Soft, translucent, almost peaceful. Rick sat beside him, quiet, not asleep, not entirely awake, just resting like he'd finally remembered how. His hand was on the console, but his mind was somewhere far beyond it. "Rick?" Morty whispered, his voice smaller than the stillness around them. Rick blinked once, slowly.
"Yeah, kid, are we
"Still moving?" Rick gave a faint nod. "A little, not fast."
not far? Just
"Coasting." Morty turned his gaze toward the darkness outside. It wasn't frightening anymore. The stars weren't cold, and the emptiness didn't feel empty. It felt like a lullaby with no words. "A song too big to need music, Rick," Morty murmured after a while. "What happens now?" Rick leaned back, exhaling through his nose.
now nothing.
"And that's the point. Nothing?" "Yeah," Rick said quietly. "The universe spent so long trying to be something. Building, expanding, exploding, thinking, laughing. Now it gets to be nothing. Peaceful. Still." Morty watched him, his voice barely a breath.
You think it misses us?
Rick smiled faintly, eyes still on the dark.
No, Morty, the universe doesn't miss.
It remembers. There's a difference. They sat there for a long time, long enough for light years to stretch and fold like gentle waves. The glow of distant remnants shimmered faintly across their faces, warm and soft, like candlelight seen through tears. Morty closed his eyes again, just listening to the quiet.
I can still hear it, he said. Rick looked over.
Hear what? The laughter.
Not loud, just echoing. Rick nodded slowly.
Yeah, that's what happens when energy stops trying to be matter.
It turns into sound. It hums, it laughs. That's what's left of everything, Morty. The sound between the stars. Morty smiled faintly. That's kind of nice. Rick didn't answer.
He was staring at the starlight, his mind somewhere between memory and peace. For once, he didn't need to explain. For once, silence said enough. The view outside began to change. Not movement, not exactly, but something softer, subtler. The stars, though still distant, seemed to pulse in slow rhythm. Light traveled between them like a slow breath, connecting one to another. The whole sky seemed alive in a way that wasn't physical, but emotional. A universe exhaling after a long, long story. Morty pressed his forehead to the glass. Do you think this is what everything was meant to come to? Rick took a long time to respond.
Maybe, or maybe it was never meant to come to anything.
Maybe it was just meant to be, and this quiet is what being sounds like when it's done trying so hard. Morty's voice was sleepy.
It's weird.
It's like everything's okay. Rick chuckled softly. Not his usual sharp laugh, but a small, human one. Yeah, that's the weirdest part. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of every version of them, every road they'd taken, every laugh and every loss. It was a silence that didn't erase. It absorbed. After a while, Rick reached into his coat and pulled out the small vial he'd kept hidden for so long. The one with a sliver of glowing blue inside. It was faint now, like the last spark of a dying match. He rolled it gently between his fingers. You remember this, Morty? Morty nodded. Yeah, that's the thing you called bottled starlight. Rick smiled faintly. I took it from a dying star once.
Thought maybe I'd use it to start something new, but
maybe it's better like this. He set the vial on the console and unscrewed the cap. The faint light drifted out, slow and weightless, floating toward the ceiling of the ship. It shimmered, expanded, and then dissolved, not into nothing, but into a soft mist that filled the cabin. Morty watched, eyes wide. The mist glowed faintly, wrapping around them like a memory. What'd you do that for? He whispered. Rick leaned back, his voice low. Some lights aren't meant to be kept, Morty. They're meant to fade where they belong. The mist glowed brighter for a moment. then dimmed, leaving only warmth in the air. Morty smiled, his eyelids growing heavier. Rick? Yeah?
I'm really glad I came with you. Rick turned his head, looking at the boy beside him.
There was no smirk this time, no sarcasm, just a small nod. Me too, kid. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or final. It was sacred. The kind of silence you don't want to disturb because it's saying everything you can't. Morty's breathing slowed.
His eyes closed.
Outside, the stars seemed to move closer, not physically, but in feeling, as if the whole sky leaned in to listen. Rick stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in a very long time, he allowed himself to close his eyes too, and the ship, small and silver and quiet, drifted gently through the dark. No longer searching, no longer running. Far in the distance, the faint, golden glow of the last universe flickered once, then faded, not gone, just resting in that stillness. There was no beginning, no ending, only memory wrapped in light. The sound that followed wasn't sound at all, more a pulse, a hum, something ancient and tender that filled the silence between the galaxies. It was laughter, maybe, or peace, or something softer than both, and as the universe folded itself into calm, two tiny shapes, a man and a boy, floated on, carried by the quiet rhythm of everything that ever was. The hum continued, like the echo of a heartbeat shared by everything. Everything's going to be okay.